food, drugs, or ideas, what you consume influences who you become. On the Mind and Matter podcast, we learn together from the best scientists and thinkers alive today about how your mind-body reacts to what you feed it. Before starting Mind and Matter, I spent 10 years in academia doing scientific research. I got a PhD in neuroscience where I focused on neuroendocrinology and the neurobiology of behavior, and before that, I specialized in molecular, developmental, and evolutionary genetics. I use my scientific background to help parse and translate the information that guests share on the podcast. In addition to the podcast, I write long-form written content inspired by the show where I integrate what I've learned across episodes. I also have a free weekly newsletter where I provide you with upcoming guests, share links, and provide commentary on scientific studies and research that I'm reading, and more. Visit mindandmatter.substack.com to find all of my content. The full version of this episode is available to paid subscribers at the Mind and Matter Substack at mindandmatter.substack.com. The full version is also freely available on my YouTube page. Just look up Mind and Matter or my name, Nick Jikomes, on YouTube, and you'll find the episode there. This is a partial version of the episode, and so it'll cut off partway through, but you'll still get a significant portion. So sign up to become a paid subscriber at Substack or visit my YouTube page to get the full episode. Joining me.
Thank you so much for inviting me.
Yeah, we were chatting a little bit before we started here, and John is definitely one of the guests I've hoped to get on since the podcast started, and I finally got him here, and I think this was a great time. John, do you just want to tell everyone a little bit about who you are and what you've studied in your career?
I'm a professor at Stanford in the departments of medicine, of epidemiology and population health, and biomedical data science. I'm running the Meta Research Innovation Center, or METRICS, at Stanford, which is a center focused on studying research and its processes, its practices, how we can make research methods and practices better. And I've worked in different fields in evidence-based medicine and other areas that it's very common to see problems with methods, with biases, with making errors, including prominently my own, I guess, and trying to be sensitized by them and try to see how we can improve efficiency and eventually get the most out of this fascinating enterprise that we call science.
Yeah, and it really is an enterprise. There's lots of parts to the scientific research process. So you've done a lot of work studying the scientific research process itself. You research.
It is research on research, and sometimes research on research on research. So there's no end to the meta transformation.
And so how did you even get into this? Why did this come to be a focus of your work?
I think from my very early steps in trying to do research, I was very interested on methods. So methods tend to be the fine print section that most people are not so interested in. People probably focus more on results, and results are great, but I was fascinated by the machinery, and I tried my hands on different types of research. So I did some research that was wet lab, basic science. I did some research that was clinical, some research that was population-based, epidemiology, some work that was more mathematical and statistics. The common denominator of what I found most attractive was the difficulty of doing good research, how much effort and dedication and commitment and being aware that error was just waiting for you to creep in, and biases are so prevalent, starting from our own biases. And also seeing that play out in pretty much the majority of papers that I was reading to try to inform my evidence base and try to see what I would do next. So increasingly, I was interested to try to understand the problems in the methods and the machinery rather than just the specific result, which might be interesting and fascinating to pursue. But I thought that unless we can improve our methods and the way that we run our investigative efforts, our chances of getting reliable results would be pretty dismal.
Yeah. And, I want to dig into a lot of different things with you, including, how we identify whether results are likely to be reliable, what markers of unreliable work are, give people a sense for some of the problems and the biases and the replication issues that are out there. But also, I think one thing that we'll come to is, I've also gotten interested in sort of the research process itself. And, especially as we're entering this new age where we have AI tools, there's a lot of AI-based large language models and other AI-based search tools that are helping people search through and synthesize the literature. One of the things I've become fascinated by is there are problems in the literature that aren't. It's not just that there are individual studies that I say are poorly done or undersampled. There can be systematic biases in entire fields for decades at a time sometimes, and the technologies that we build on top of them are sort of going to inherit those biases based on how they work. And I want to dig into a lot of this. Let's just give people some sense for one of the big issues here. So a lot of people talk about the replication crisis. They will often talk about this in the context of specific fields like psychology, but of course, it's not specific to any one field. There's a lot of big replication issues that have become more known to people, I think, in recent years. What would you say the replication crisis is? Is it something that spans most scientific disciplines? And what is sort of the extent of this crisis?
I think the replication crisis is not necessarily something new. It is something that is inherent to the way that we have been practicing science. And replication is a fundamental component of how science should be run. It's a way to verify that what we're doing is reproducible. We can put some more trust to it, and we can build on it with more confidence. I think that the term crisis has been coined in the last 10, 15 years because more attention has focused on that aspect of research. And I think that our calibration and expectations of how likely our results might be correct has been a bit overblown. And when people started looking systematically into that question, we had to recalibrate our expectations. I think that for a while we had forgotten that science is so difficult and so bias prone. We thought that we were probably overconfident. And then we have these large reproducibility efforts suggesting that a large share of our published results cannot be reproduced. And that leads to that terminology crisis. But it's not that this is new. It was there. I think that people, at least the majority, probably did not have that as a top priority in their thinking, and probably it moved up the ladder of priorities and prime considerations in doing science and thinking about science and interpreting science and translating science. It's a problem, and it is also inherent in the scientific method. So it's both a challenge and an opportunity. I don't see it as something negative, realizing that there is that challenge could be a good way to try to think about how we can improve some of our performance and some of the track record of how our research could replicate or not.
Is there how are replication issues distributed across fields? So, people will often sort of think in terms of a spectrum from soft sciences to hard sciences, usually based in terms of how rigorously quantitative they are. Are the replication issues confined mostly to so-called softer sciences, or is this something we see in harder sciences and even physical sciences as well?
I think that they can arise in any scientific field, provided that it is a scientific field. So a field that is always 100% correct is probably not a scientific field. It's probably some dogmatic, religion, political, but not scientific effort that would be always correct. I think that also it depends on how difficult the questions are that we ask and how difficult are the odds of success. So some fields that seemingly have lower replication rates may actually be dealing with more interesting questions, with more high-risk questions, with more difficult issues that success is likely to be less compared to others. So I don't believe in a hierarchical view of sciences as these are the best sciences and this is the second-class citizen and this is the worst scientific fields because each scientific field has its own performance characteristics, has its own goals and targets. It has very different priors compared to others in terms of the likelihood of success. And it would be a pity if we try to kind of put one scientific field against the others and create some sort of competition of shaming each other that you're not reproducible and you're not replicable. We have seen problems with replication across practically any field that someone wanted to take a serious look. And it is not something that should be so surprising. Even with rigorous measurements, even with fields that are very structured, things can go wrong, or the types of questions are such that the success rate is bounded by some percentage. And maybe that's the best that you can get in some cases, but that's okay if you have a way to filter eventually the credible information and move forward.
Yeah, so a low replication rate, whatever exactly we choose that to mean, it could indicate something negative or bad, like, people are doing sloppy work, but it can also be an indicator of, being on the cutting edge or actually doing high risk, interesting questions. So it's not necessarily a negative thing inherently.
Exactly. I mean, if you study whether the sun is going to rise next day, probably the replication rate will be 100%. But it's not an interesting question. Conversely, if you work in a very high risk field, many of the leads that are discovered are likely to be false and be refuted. But this doesn't mean that field needs to be abandoned. So it's a question of efficiency that needs to be calibrated against what is the likely value of the information, what are the consequences of true discoveries, what are the consequences of false discoveries, especially false discoveries that take a while to be refuted and they stay with us and we build on them and go down the wrong path, or even get translated into interventions and policies that may be detrimental. So it's a complex system. I don't think that we should be oversimplifying into single percentages of success and failure. And we need to look at the big picture and try to see whether we can get something that makes more sense, is more useful, and is more credible.
And whether or not there's something like a replication crisis in any given field, if we have any sense for what the replication rate is, that implies that people have actually tried to replicate experiments. And of course, it's very natural, if you're doing research, it's more fun and more exciting and more advantageous from a career advancement standpoint to make a novel discovery, not to just check if someone else's discovery is accurate. So how much emphasis is there out there on actually replicating results that are already in the literature?
So there's quite some debate about that, both regarding how much replication is out there and also how much replication is desirable. If you take scientific papers at face value, the vast majority of them are trying to say that what I have done here is something novel or has something new to say. And the reality is, nevertheless, that many papers don't really do something novel, and they're just replicating, perhaps with some minor twists, some experiments or studies or knowledge that already exists. One way to document this is to look at meta-analysis, systematic reviews and meta-analysis that try to revisit what we know on a given scientific question. And in medicine, for example, the average meta-analysis finds 7 to 9 studies. There are some topics that we have 100 plus studies, and of course others that we have 0. But on average, we do have a number of studies that systematic reviewers believe are similar enough to put in the same forest plot, consider them as attacking more or less the same or similar question that they can be summarized together. Now, are they replications of each other? I think that people who do them don't think themselves as replicators. They see themselves as investigators contributing knowledge. But in fact, they're pretty similar. So they do belong to the same bin of information, to the same bin of knowledge. So there's more replication than we know knowledge, probably. It varies a lot across scientific fields. I use the example of meta-analysis. Even whether we perform systematic reviews and meta-analysis has wide heterogeneity across science. In most biomedical fields, there's a lot of meta-analysis. In some fields, there's more meta-analysis than primary studies. And in other fields, there's very few, and some fields still have done hardly any such efforts to synthesize the evidence and see where do we stand, what do we know, where have we done a lot of studies, and where have we done no studies at all. So there is wide divergence on both the extent of replication and even the willingness to look at how much replication has been done. Mm-hmm. That goes even a step further when you think about what is the desirable level of replication, because an argument that is raised very often is that you cannot just try to replicate everything, and that would mean that you will have a lot of waste, and you're then trying to replicate waste, and that would be a loss of time and resources and effort, and we need to move forward and give priority to discovery. This is partly true. Probably there are some experiments or some studies that are so horrible and so useless that nobody should care about them, and we should just put them to rest. But at the same time, I believe that replication is integral to discovery. It's not necessarily separate from discovery. I think that the replication and reproducibility check is integral in solidifying discovery and making sure that we are dealing with something that we can put some trust in and move forward. And without it, we may be wasting even more effort and even more resources going down the wrong path because we trusted something that was not to be trusted. So this is an open debate, and obviously the best answer has to be operationalized differently in different circumstances, depending on feasibility. Sometimes, if you have a study that took 20 years to do, and how is it to replicate that? Wait another 20 years. Versus here's a study that replicating it means just clicking a few buttons on your laptop to run some analysis on some existing data sets that can tell you right away whether you get the same signal or not. And it would cost nothing versus it would cost $1 billion. Mm-hmm. So it's not a one size fits all, but there's unevenness in both how much replication we have and also how much replication would be desirable.
Mm-hmm. One of your most highly cited papers, and you're a very, very highly cited researcher yourself. One of the most highly cited papers you have is titled "Why Most Published Research Findings Are False." And it says right on the first page, it can be proven that most claimed research findings are false. Can you unpack that for us? Is that meant to be taken literally or not?
It is literal. I mean, it's a bold statement, perhaps, but it is basically modeling the chances that if you come up with a discovery based on, let's say, some statistical threshold of significance, and you say, I have found some signal, some treatment effect, some association, how likely is that to be truly so, and not a false positive finding? So it tries to see what the impact of different factors would be, including the power of the study to discover effects that might be out there to be discovered, the number of investigators who try to attack that question or similar questions and do not join forces to just do a single analysis of all their data sets, but each one of them is trying to outpace the others, and also the extent of bias that may creep in and may turn some of the non-significant results into significant results. So why these things are happening, of course, can be due to multiple reasons and multiple influences on the research agenda, the research design, the sponsors, conflicts of interest, knowledge of research methods or lack of knowledge of research methods, sloppiness, sometimes fraud, hopefully not that common, but even that exists. So if you build their composite impact, under most circumstances where you can think of how research is done in most fields and most types of designs and most types of questions that we ask, the probability of a statistically significant discovery to be a true positive is less than 50%. And in some cases, it's much less than that, especially when we talk about a very lenient statistical significance threshold of a p-value of less than 0.05, which is what most fields traditionally have used. Mm-hmm. So I don't think that it would be surprising, and it is actually congruent with what we see with empirical results when we try to reproduce or replicate empirical investigations.
Mm-hmm. I want to talk a little bit about statistical significance and what that means and how we define it and how it's used. Of course, if you just sort of think in, if everything worked the way that we hope it worked, scientists do scientific research, they submit their research to the peer review process. So other people that have similar expertise have to actually check their work. And if they agree that the work is good enough, it gets published. And then, of course, after it's published, it's hopefully going to be open to anyone to look at. And then other people can look at it and discover the results. So, for example, journalists will often report on the scientific results that are published in the peer-reviewed literature for a lay audience. Obviously, that work is published in journals by technical experts. If everything's working as it should, then a journalist is going to look at it and they should be able to take it at face value, right? They should be able to say, this was published in Nature, therefore it's a very reputable journal. It's been peer reviewed. 2 or 3 experts have looked at it and checked it. And it says right in the paper, statistically significant. Of course, as you know, and anyone who's in the research world knows, of course, that's not exactly how things work. Just because something's published doesn't mean it's rigorous or replicable. Just because something's statistically significant doesn't mean it's actually true. For people who don't know what a p-value is, can you explain that concept and what we mean by statistical significance in normal speak?
Okay, I think that any effort to simplify these concepts probably will lead to a wrong definition, unavoidably to some extent. But one simple way to put it is that it is one way to provide some sense about what would be the probability of finding some result that is as extreme as we have found, or even more extreme. So deviating from the null finding, like there's no difference or no treatment effect or no treatment benefit or no harm or no signal, no association. So we find some signal. What is the probability of finding that signal or even a stronger signal if actually there is no signal, and if actually, that is kind of silenced. There's no bias. This is kind of taken out of the usual way of thinking about it, based on what we have done. So, if we do see a small p-value, this doesn't mean that we have a very small chance that this is not true, because it much depends on what are the starting chances that there is some signal. And if we're looking at a field that has no signals to be discovered, and let's say we were very unlucky and we selected to go into a scientific field where there's nothing to be discovered, then no matter what the p-value is, we're stuck. We will get some very nice looking p-values, very small p-values, but they will mean nothing. And it's always a challenge to understand and calibrate what is the field that I'm working on, and how much is there to be discovered there. Now, a paper being published in a peer-reviewed journal is is better than not being published in a peer-reviewed journal. And we know that peer review does improve scientific papers, and roughly about a third of scientific papers become better through peer review. Maybe 5% become worse. The editors and the reviewers manage to make the paper worse.
And how do we specifically know that? And what exactly do you mean by better or worse?
So there are some studies, for example, like some that Sally Hopewell and others have done, where we had access to the original version of a paper and the final published version, and also the reviewer comments. And let's say independent scientists try to arbitrate very carefully to see whether the interventions of the peer reviewers and editors improve the paper in some tangible way, not improving commas or full stops or just a little bit of the aesthetics of the language, but some equation was wrong and it was corrected, or some data had been miscalculated and that was fixed, or some information was missing and that was really added. Conversely, some important information was there, but it was removed, which makes the paper worse. So roughly based on this type of empirical evaluations, we know that, as I said, about a third of the papers get better, about 5% get worse, and about 2/3 are not really touched materially by peer review. And now these that are not touched materially does not mean that they were perfect. It's very unlikely that they were perfect based on what we have seen in terms of biases and errors and misrepresentations and flaws. Very likely most of them have problems that simply were not detected by peer review. Reviewers are over fatigued. They have very limited time. They don't get paid for what they do. Sometimes you ask 20 people to get a couple to agree to write a review that is usually 100 words or 200 words, and half of that is not really saying anything, and maybe there's a few points that might be making a difference at best. So without saying that peer review is a bad idea, it's not a panacea. And a lot of flawed papers will go through the system. There's also lots of journals that have little or no peer review. There's predatory journals. There's other journals that have very little peer review. They will publish practically anything or almost anything. So having a paper published does not necessarily mean much. Having it published in a prestigious, highly competitive journal like Nature or Science in Basic Science, or New England Journal of Medicine or Lancet in medicine, does not mean necessarily that it is more credible. I think that this is a misconception. There's opposing forces here. I think that some papers that end up in these top-tier journals that have the highest competition for their pages and acceptance rates of 5% or less, I think that, yes, they may attract some of the best work, some of the most kind of anticipated and expected, and work that a lot of resources and a lot of thinking and a lot of brain power have been invested, and everybody's waiting for the results. And it is a well done study, very well designed and very well supervised, and lots of people, in a way, have reviewed it beyond the couple of peer reviews who see it at the end. So yes, that type of research probably is going to be more credible on average, although sometimes even that may not be the case. I mean, if there's a conflicted agenda, for example, behind it. So it has to be seen on a case-by-case basis. But then the majority of papers that would end up in these journals are not necessarily these widely expected kind of central studies that hundreds of people are reviewing somehow and putting effort into. They're mostly studies that tend to have a very strong surprise factor. They are studies that find some result that is extreme, really novel or seeming to be novel, and effect sizes are larger than average. And in that case, there's two possibilities. One is that, yes, this is a discovery of something that is really so extreme and so nice and so beautiful, large effect. And the second possibility is that this is winner's curse, that even simply by chance, someone has found this very strong signal, but actually the real signal is much smaller, if not non-existent at all.
Hmm.
And if you think in this way, if you have a small study that there's millions such studies being done, and it gets an average result, it's not going to make it in these journals.
Yeah, yeah.
The only chance that it will make it in one of these journals is if it has found something that's really
Mm.
extreme.
So if by
And
chance something that's
yeah,
not that extreme is studied a bunch of times, the person who finds the extreme result is actually going to be biased to be the one who publishes on it first.
exactly. So you have a winner's curse that is likely to affect these journals far more than the average, let's say, good, respectable journal that is willing to publish more average type of results.
Hmm.
And we have documented that. We have run empirical analysis looking at topics that have been assessed by studies that were published in top tier journals like New England Journal of Medicine, JAMA, and Lancet, and also in specialty journals on the very same intervention, the same type of question. What we saw is that when we're talking about large studies, then the effect sizes are about the same in the top tier journals and in the specialty journals that published on that topic. But when you have small studies published in these top journals, their results are hugely inflated
Mm.
compared to similar studies asking the same question and published in specialty journals. And these inflated results typically just get washed away when someone looks at them again and realizes that that's not such a huge benefit, such a huge signal as what has been published now.
Hmm.
So, nothing is perfect. No journal is a perfect guarantee that what is published there is going to be impeccable.
Hmm. You mentioned there's a lot of places we can go with this. I guess the essence of what you were saying just now for people to understand is, statistical significance is an important concept. It has to be computed the right way. There are assumptions that go into it, which may or may not be justified. The sample sizes and the effect sizes matter. I'm not sure we need to go into too much technical detail on those things, but just for everyone listening, the size of your samples, how good your data is when it's collected matters. The assumptions, being cognizant of the assumptions that are made to do the appropriate statistical tests, all of that matters. And sometimes people do it correctly and rigorously, and sometimes they don't. It's a mixed bag. All of these things matter. I want to talk about next something that you mentioned, which is that there's a lot of journals out there. There's been a massive proliferation of the number of journals over the years. And you also mentioned that some of these journals are predatory journals. Let's take those one at a time. How many journals are out there? Can you give us a sense for that? And why are there so many?
There's different estimates, but let's say that there's more than 50,000 journals out there.
50,000.
50,000, 50,000, yes.
Wow.
So, yes, indeed, that's a huge number. Of course, that covers all science, and there's a very large of scientific fields. So it could be that if you break it down per scientific field, for some fields, there's only one or two that really publish the majority of papers in that particular domain. In some other fields, there's just a very large number that could accommodate the literature that is coming out of scientific efforts. So it's not that every paper can go to any of these 50,000 journals. Some papers have a more limited target journal space compared to others. But clearly there's a lot. And we don't even know the full number because, as I said, there's some that are less visible. There's many that are predatory, which means that they are just small or more than small businesses that you pay some money and the paper will get published practically with no peer review. There's a growing array of mega journals that publish thousands of papers every year. The typical journals in the past used to publish 100, 200 papers every year, some of them a bit more, but not much more. And mega journals, by definition, they publish more than 2,000 papers every year. Some of them publish more than 20,000 papers every year. So They have peer review. Their acceptance rates are not 100% unless they're predatory, but they may be accepting 30, 40, 50, 60% of what they receive. And then you have a very wide array of all sorts of specialty journals, and uh, with different business models, with a very large publisher industry that is
Hmm.
making lots of money out of
Hmm.
that process. So the publishing industry is a roughly $30 billion annual turnaround,
That's 30 billion
industry
in revenue per year.
in revenue, and the profit margin for the big publishers is in the range of 30 to 40%, which
Wow.
is if not the highest, among the highest compared to any other really legitimate enterprise
Yeah,
that
I mean that
one
would be a
can think of.
that's as good or better than the profit margins of like Apple.
It is, yes, it is. So Elsevier, for example, and Wiley have better profit margins than Apple. Yeah.
And those are two of the larger publishers that own journals that people probably heard about, brand name journals like Cell.
Exactly. There's five publishers that publish the lion's share of
Mhm.
the scientific literature, and now we have these mega journal publishers that are also pushing the frontier of. One of them is called Frontiers, actually.
Yeah, yeah, I'm familiar with Frontiers.
That are pushing the numbers of
Yeah.
papers being
So
published.
so 50,000 journals, give or take, doing 30 billion with a B dollars in revenue per year with profit margins that are among the highest of any private company in any industry. So this is a
Yeah,
big business in every sense.
it is. It is, and one wonders whether we're getting what we pay for, and
Yes.
probably we don't.
Yes. And why is this such a big business? How does this connect to so obviously there's issues here on the supply side. There are a lot of academics doing a lot of research, and so there's a lot of potential papers to publish. There's a demand side to this, and we can talk about that. And then there's also the issue of costs, and the costs for these publishers. It would be an interesting area to talk about because you already mentioned previously that. So we're talking about publishing papers that go through peer review. So peer review is a key component of the manufacturing process, so to speak. But the peer review is done for free in most cases. Is that true?
That's true. There's very, very few exceptions where peer review is paid, and even those, the amount being paid is so little that it doesn't make a difference. Like $5, $10, maybe $50. Um, I'm involved in one journal that was launched recently where the model is to pay reviewers $500, and it's an experiment. I don't know if it would work to
Yeah.
improve the quality and rigor of the peer review process.
Yeah, I just spoke to
Um,
Martin Koldorf. That's the journal you're referring to?
yeah, yeah. So I see it as an experimental effort. We don't know what is the best model for supporting peer review, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
We have run some randomized trials, not as many as I would wish, but there are some randomized trials trying to randomize different modes of review, like open peer review, blinded peer review. Uh, there's some trials of training for peer review. There's some that look at having a statistician peer reviewer look at the papers. The effects tend to be modest or even null. I think the clearest signal would be for having a statistician look at the papers. That clearly seems to improve the subsequent versions that get published. But then the challenge is where do we find statisticians to look at 7 million papers that are published every year?
Right.
There's not that big a workforce of statisticians and methodologists. They have their own things to do and work on. We cannot hope to engage them to review 7 million papers. So there's lots of incentives to publish. Um, I have nothing against publication and productivity. In fact, for many decades, I have been struggling, as many other scientists, against publication bias and non-publication of negative results.
Right.
So I would be the last to say that we should not publish. um, we need to publish. We need transparency. We need openness. We need to communicate.
Hmm.
I think we need to communicate with even more transparency and with more details
Hmm.
about what we do. Uh, but it is a huge business, as you say, and it is exploited by those who are centrally placed to make profit out of it.
Let's talk about that a little bit because, I mean, people in this world often know, at least to some extent, how some of this stuff works. Almost no one in the research world who I've ever met, even when I was in academia, almost no one is satisfied with the way peer review works. For those listening, when you're in the academic world and you're doing research, and all of your friends and colleagues are doing research too, when I think about every single time I heard someone talk about, oh, I've got my paper, it's under review right now. Oh, how's it going? Almost 100% of the time, the answer is some version of, it sucks. It's terrible. The reviewers aren't doing it right. Blah, blah. No, I've never heard anyone once in my life say, the reviewers had some critical things to say and they're absolutely right. And I changed my mind. And the paper's not getting in, but I learned a lot. And then, of course, there's sort of the business side of this and the exploitative nature that many people would say that the big journals operate with. Can you start to talk about how this became such a big business? Where are they generating all this revenue from? Is it from subscriptions? How is this such a big profitable business?
So just to close our discussion on peer review, I think that there are peer reviews that are constructive. I
Mm-hmm.
don't want to be so dismissive. Personally, I have had peer reviews on many of my papers where I felt that the paper did improve.
Yeah.
So I feel that I really benefited from that input, sometimes even very negative input. But oh goodness, thank you very much. You picked
Mm-hmm.
some error that I had made, and I hadn't noticed, and now I can fix this. So, and some papers do get substantially improved. So,
Yeah.
so I'm uneasy about just discrediting peer review, and I do acknowledge, nevertheless, that it is a very suboptimal system. It leaves lots of possibilities of things to go wrong. Now, the publishing system has evolved over the years, and it has become more massive, both in terms of number of journals and in terms of number of papers. And also, it is highly hierarchical. So journals have very strong prestige factors attached to them. And this has been largely been a journal impact factor business,
Yeah.
which basically looks at the average number of citations in the first 2 years after the publication of a paper. It is a flawed metric by many different ways of looking at it. There have been many efforts to try to dismantle it,
Mm-hmm.
to say, no, we're not going to look at it, but goodness, everybody's looking at it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that reinforces both the um, prestige ladder and also the gaming of the system. So people, journals, editors, publishers are just struggling to prevail in a gaming system that is not necessarily aligned with better science, with better research. It is trying to optimize some
Mm-hmm.
numbers that are surrogates, and most of the time they're very poor surrogates,
Yes.
or capture very little of the essence of
Yes.
what we should be interested in. Um, how do you get rid of that? I think that we need to experiment. We need to try many different ways, let many flowers bloom and see whether some of them may be more successful. It is not like a uniform system. We have new ideas, we have new concepts, we have preprints, for example, where people can post their work um, practically for free. A model that has been very successful in fields like physical sciences, and I think that now it starts becoming more successful, or at least more popular, in biomedical sciences as well. We have models like eLife, where journals are seen mostly as a platform to perform review, hopefully good review, and then the authors may decide to publish their papers regardless of what reviews they get, but they will
Hmm.
have the reviews along with what they publish. And I think that we need to study peer review rigorously to understand uh, what it does, what it does not do. Also study who is doing what. Some very fundamental questions like what kind of editors do we need?
Hmm.
For example, most of the high-profile journals, they don't have editors, people who are highly credentialed scientists who are in the top of their fields. They have professional editors who they only have experience as editors. They may have done some background training, maybe got a master's degree. Some of them maybe got even a PhD,
Hmm.
but they never kind of did a lot of scientific work themselves. They're editors, and that's what they do. Is that better? Is it worse? I mean, they will defend the model as being more objective, that they don't care that much about who is submitting and
Hmm.
what they say. They're kind of remote, but I
Hmm.
mean, how remote can you be and still be
Yeah.
relevant to a field?
Right.
I think that that's a challenge. So even very fundamental questions, um, I think should be open to scrutiny and assessment in terms
Hmm.
of do they improve or do they make things worse?
Hmm. But just getting down to the nitty gritty here to make this super concrete for people. So we got a $30 billion industry. So there's a lot of revenue being generated with high profit margins by these big name journals. Like, where is the money coming from? Like what is the specific revenue that's being generated? Is it a high cost to publish that the researchers are paying? Is it subscriptions to the journal that many people are subscribing to, or is it?
So some of the revenue comes from subscription.
Mhm.
A large part of the revenue comes from subscription, which means that universities and other institutions need to pay
Mm.
these publishers a lot of money in order to be able to have access to the papers that their researchers are producing.
Mhm. And
Uh,
how are those prices determined? Is there sort of a free market where the prices are set by supply and demand, or not?
well, in theory, it is a free market, but as I said, there's really very few big publishers.
Hmm.
And that creates a situation that is probably more close to a cartel.
Hmm.
So if you really had 50,000 players that are independent, uh, truly independent, probably the prices would go down. But we don't have 50,000 players. We have five, maybe six, seven, if you add also the new mega journal publishers that are rising quickly. And therefore, somehow the prices have been staying at pretty high levels and allow for these large profit margins for these big players.
Hmm.
So it's mostly how do you kind of change that cartel situation, and to a large extent it is about subscriptions. There's an extra layer which is the publication cost, the article processing fees,
Hmm.
where typically to publish your work in open access, and some journals are entirely open access. Others are moving to become entirely open access. Some are mixed, but people may still wish to have their work published as open access. They have to pay several $1,000s to do
Hmm.
that. And in some of the top journals, they need to pay more than 10,000, more
Yeah.
than $12,000, in Nature, for example, to have a single paper published.
So just to be clear for those listening, if in some cases, if you see a paper out there published in a place like a journal like Nature or another big name journal, if it's open access, which it may or may not be, if it's open access, that often means that the scientist who did the study, who led the study, paid thousands of dollars just to have it published so that it's openly available.
Exactly. Yes. Which means that that money is removed from that scientist's budget to do research. You pay researcher salaries or
Mm-hmm.
consumables or other types of resources and effort. Uh, Often it would come from the funders. If it's
Mm-hmm.
public funding, it would come from public
Mm-hmm.
funding, meaning taxpayers. So there's a lot of double dipping here
Yeah.
that people who profit from the system, they're gathering money from different sides and different steps in that process.
Yeah. So
And
you're actually asking scientists to do peer review for free. It's like literally having an
right,
employee that you don't pay, and then they
yeah,
have to pay you to have it published, and they pay more if it's open access. And then it actually becomes even more absurd, you might say, when you start to think about it in terms of, well, over time, right? We used to have physical journals, used to, physically buy a journal and they would have to physically print it, but that's really not the case so much anymore. So the cost of the journal should be going down in that sense. And yet I imagine these fees have not adjusted.
indeed. And if you have a cartel, it will not get adjusted. I mean, I
Yeah.
think it will remain at a very high profit margin moving forward, no matter what improvements we have in technological transformation of the
Mm-hmm.
of the publishing
Mm-hmm.
enterprise, which indeed now can cost less because we can just do everything online. We can have things done much more efficiently.
Yeah.
So it is a big problem. It is a big black hole in a sense in the vicinity of science. It is absorbing a lot of scientific resources, and scientists by default are just offering more to that black hole. We're offering free peer review, as you mentioned.
Mm-hmm.
We are offering funds to make a paper open access. We're offering funds from our universities to pay for subscriptions, and so forth.
Mm-hmm. So there really is probably like a collective action problem here where if every scientist, every researcher just simultaneously demanded, hey, we need to be compensated for a time, even if it's modest, because that's just what we're demanding from you, something would happen. But of course, you need a critical mass of people to do that. And for various reasons, that's very unlikely.
Indeed. Yeah. And perhaps we should have someone from the publisher's side to to give a balanced view. I mean, I don't want to demonize publishers as being goodness these horrible demons who are just making money out of good scientists and good institutions and good funders. I'm sure that they also offer some value and offer a commodity that is important.
Some
I
value,
think
sure.
yeah, I mean, it's an issue of what we prioritize as a society and
Mhm.
what we feel is our legitimate enterprises and legitimate margins of profit.
Mhm.
I mean, we have so many other enterprises, like, the tobacco industry is making a lot of profit and it's just killing people.
Mhm.
So I think that uh, I'm biased to say that we have a problem, and I think that publishers should be making much less out of what they do. But it would have been nice to have someone to give a counter argument
Mhm.
that maybe we should have more of them and perhaps less of the tobacco industry or other companies that are really just causing death and wreaking havoc to society with no value.
Yeah. Full version of this episode is available to paid subscribers at the Mind and Matter Substack at mindandmatter.substack.com. The full version is also freely available on my YouTube page. Just look up Mind and Matter or my name, Nick Jikomis, on YouTube, and you'll find the episode there. This is a partial version of the episode, and so it'll cut off partway through, but you'll still get a significant portion. So sign up to become a paid subscriber at Substack or visit my YouTube page to get the full episode.